Hello and welcome to Swipin Through History. My name is Thomas Dennis. I am the writer and presenter of the documentaries you will see on this channel. And I'm here today with the wonderful Mike Ingram, who is the historian of the channel. I thought we would use this opportunity to get to know him a little bit better, hear some of his thoughts about the channel, and maybe go into a little bit more detail on the first episode that we have released recently, which is about the first Battle of St. Albans in 1455. So first of all, thank you, Mike, for joining us. Thank you for being here today.
My absolute pleasure.
And tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? What is your historical background?
Okay, so when I was a lot younger, I was a defence journalist and spent a lot of time out with the army on tour with various different organisations and covering various events and exercises. I was also a defence photographer and spent a lot of time at air shows. But then in the 1980s, when peace broke out and there wasn't really much work in that line of business, I then went into marketing. I went back to university and qualified for marketing. But all this time, I still had my urge to get back into history and history writing and all the other things that went with it.
So would you say that because of your background, you tend to focus in more in military history, or is it just in in periods of history in general?
You can't separate one from the other, I think, in all honesty, because if you don't understand life and period at the time and the things that are going on around it, you've got no chance of understanding the finer detail of battles. So although I tend towards more of a military history and being a military historian, I think in reality I'm just a medieval historian.
So you also do some work with the Northamptonshire Battlefield Society.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Of course, yeah. Going back to 2012, the Northamptonshire 1460 battle, because there are actually a lot of battles in Northamptonshire all the way through history. Basically, because the battlefield was under threat of development, I set up Northamptonshire Battlefield Society to try and protect it and help protect it. And after a very long campaign, yes, we did save the battlefield, and it's still untouched.
It's now a golf course, isn't it?
Part of it's a golf course, yeah, but it extends over quite a large area, all told. But as part of that as well, we had to carry out, or I had to carry out, new research, because we obviously needed the right information, and there were so many fables, legends and stories associated with the battle that I needed to know the truth. So off I went and started researching the battle in more detail, hence the book of mine that's out, Northampton 1460, which tells the whole story and everything and everybody surrounding it.
And that's obviously what we focus on telling in our documentaries is the real story. It is focused on the stories of the people that fought during those battles, and what actually happened on those days, tracing their footsteps, as it were. In terms of this channel, what are you most looking forward to? Obviously, the first series, which I should mention, is focused on the Wars of the Roses, hence why Mike and I are talking a little bit more about that period at the moment. And we're looking at telling the story of every single battle of the Wars of the Roses. There's a lot of debate as to how many battles were actually fought, because some historians disregard some of the smaller skirmishes. But in this series, we're aiming at telling the story of all of them. And so, Mike, what is it that's exciting you about this channel? What are you most looking forward to?
Oh, all of it. Every single second, every single fraction of time of it, I'm really looking forward to, because as much as anything else, you have to understand the whole story of the Wars of the Roses to understand it. People pick off parts like Bosworth, for example. But to understand Bosworth, you have to understand what was going on beforehand. So telling the story all the way through,
What is that story for viewers or people who may be watching who might not know much about the Wars of the Roses? What is that story? What was the war about? Obviously, it's very complicated. We could talk about it for hours on end, but just in your in a way, the quickest, most succinct way possible. How can you explain the basics of the Wars of the Roses? What are we talking about when we talk about it?
It's about who wanted to be king at the end of the day, and that is actually very rare. Most of a big thing about British and English history is we're very good at. I'm trying to think of the best way to actually describe it. Glossing over some of our civil wars because we call them different things. But at the end of the day, they're still civil wars, and that goes right back all the way from William the Conqueror.
Yeah, obviously. So what you're saying is the Wars of the Roses was a civil war in effect.
Oh yes, yeah, but it's slightly different because all it involves is the gentry, the nobility, and the kings or the potential kings.
So roughly 5% of the population is that what we're talking about?
Yes, yeah, and their supporters. Really, it doesn't go into a much bigger thing. But if you go on to the English Civil War, for example, that's the first real total war that involves everybody, and nobody's really safe.
We were talking about this the other day. You were comparing the number of casualties in the English Civil War to another conflict. I can't remember quite exactly.
That was the First World War.
Okay,
that was the First World War.
Well, expand on that a little bit for us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there was more people died in the English Civil War per head of population at the time. In the Civil War, died as in the First World War.
Wow!
And when you think about it, that's like horrific.
As a percentage of the population, as it were.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Blimey.
And people forget that.
Well, I didn't know that. I'd never really thought of it in that way, because obviously everything is in context. Obviously, history, if you take history out of context, it becomes very dangerous, in my opinion. But obviously when you put it in context like that, you understand the extent of the devastation, the extent of the conflict, and the way in which it affected people's lives. Whereas, for example, with Wars of the Roses that we just talked about, obviously, if that's only involving around 5% of the population and their immediate followers, then a lot of people could have lived through that period and very rarely come across any of the battles or conflicts.
Exactly, and a lot of people wouldn't have left their immediate vicinity.
What is exciting about what we are working on is, as you said, it's in a way, there's a lot of research being put into these medieval battles that are kind of changing the way history has been told before. And so we're looking at it we're taking the same route of investigation, as it were. We're looking at it very much from a human perspective and where they would have gone and where they would have stood and what they would have actually seen, using all of that new material that you and your wonderful colleagues have kind of blessed us with, as it were.
Yes, yeah, and that's it, and that's how it goes on. It's the same with Bosworth. When we get to showing Bosworth on here, that's brought about because a lot of time at research, re-evaluating the evidence, and again, there are so many legends and inaccuracies in that story, so the true story needs to be told of it, and it's also obviously helped by recent archaeology, because the archaeology has shown us where the battle was fought. You then have to go back and look at all the documentary evidence, and you then look at the story and combine the archaeology with the documentary evidence, and you get an entirely different view and picture of the battle.
I find it amazing how a lot of these battlefield sites as well, they tend to be in places where the general public might just fall upon them, without realizing. The Battle of Northampton's a golf course, so you might just be out playing a round of golf one day and you don't realize you're tracing the footsteps of medieval soldiers. The Battle of Bosworth Field, for example, is on a public footpath, and a lot of these places, the first Battle of St Albans happened in the town centre, which obviously is where the first episode is shot. And, you know, people are there every single day going about their daily lives and their business and their shopping, and they don't have any idea of these incredible stories that took place right where they're standing. You know,
Exactly.
and that really is kind of what's kind of driving me forward with telling these stories and this channel. But for you, obviously, being a historian, you've done your research, you've written your books, you know, you do your battlefield tours, you reach out to thousands of people. What is it about this channel that kind of made you want to sign on and jump on board?
The way you're presenting it, I think, is the perfect way to tell the story. I'm going to try to do this without making you get too big-headed. But you're the right age to tell the story. You can connect to the right people, having seen what you've done already. I think it's the perfect way to tell the story and tell the right audiences, because a lot of the younger audiences in particular really have got no idea that they're, as you say, walking in the footsteps of kings, queens, nobles, and people lose their lives. Particularly with the medieval period, we tend to connect more with the First World War and the thousands of people who've lost their lives in the First World War. But we've got thousands of people losing their lives in the medieval period in wars, and we shouldn't forget them as well.
Yeah, I'd say that's a very nice thing to say, and I agree. You know, what is the value of life? That is a huge question, and just because, you know, we remember more clearly the people of 100 years ago doesn't mean we shouldn't try and remember those who gave their lives for things they believed in 500 years ago. Because their lives meant as much to them then as ours do to us now, and that is a really, you know, that's a really nice way of looking at it, actually, and obviously thank you for the kind words as well. And I think you've said something there as well, which is very close to my heart as well. Is it's reaching out to a younger generation as well, of trying to find new ways of telling these stories, making them relatable to the here and now, to the modern day.
Oh yeah, and there are so many inaccuracies that have crept in, and because of easy access to things on the internet, a lot of these legends are being taken as fact rather than actually, well, perhaps they're not right. There is some more research. There is more things being done on these battlefields.
Well, it's propaganda, isn't it? It's propaganda that we're seeing today. We obviously, you see it everywhere today. Everything is a form of propaganda. It's a message that someone somewhere wants you to read and believe in. And the same thing was happening then. So just for all of us, the Wars of the Roses, how long did it go on for, and what was let's say the starting date and the end date?
Oh, you've asked a really difficult question there. The date.
I wasn't going to make it easy for you, Mike. Come on.
No, I know, but we haven't got the time for me to give a full answer.
But can we give like 2 dates and kind of say, you know, up to historical interpretation, that is roughly the time scale of which it was fought?
Right. We can have three major possibilities of dates.
Okay.
The first one is when Henry IV takes the throne, because that's when the conflict between the Lancastrian, so-called Lancastrians, and the Yorkists really starts.
And what date was that?
That's 1400.
1400, okay.
Well, 1399 and 1400. And we get a series of risings and rebellions, which all failed, which were effectively, I suppose, Yorkist-led, although there wasn't such thing as a Yorkist party at that time. It was the House of York.
And what was the House of York and the House of Lancaster then? Obviously, I talk a lot about it in the first episode and in the series, but just to explain, you know, obviously, if someone has never heard of the two houses before, you know, what are they? Who are they?
Right. In the simplest version, we have to go back to Edward III. He creates for the first time dukes. He creates dukedoms for his sons, and one of his sons eventually becomes the Duke of Lancaster, which is John of Gaunt.
Mm-hmm.
His next son, his first son, of course, is the Black Prince. His second son, Lionel of Antwerp, who ends up dying out in Italy, and that's a whole wonderful other story for another day. The third son is John of Gaunt, and the fourth son is becomes the Duke of York eventually. So that's where the two houses come from. They're all descendants from Edward III. So
it's a big family row.
Yeah, basically, and it ends up with the Lancastrian branch of the family actually taking the throne when Richard II's usurped, and he ends up dying in Pontefract Castle, under very suspicious circumstances. So that's where it really begins. But back there, another potential starting point for it is what's known as Jack Cade's Rebellion.
Okay,
and that's in 1450. Again, it's worth 2 episodes on its own. And then the third potential starting point is the Battle of St Albans, which of course you're covering.
Which is the one the one we use, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the. But again, is when do you say a war starts? When the fighting started, or when they fall out with each other? Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why it's very difficult to give you an exact starting point.
Well, there's lots of material to get our teeth into there at a later date. So let's, for argument's sake, take the third option, which is the First Battle of St Albans in 1455, which is when, let's say, for all intents and purposes, our story is about the battle. So obviously when the fighting starts is 1455. When does it end? What is the last battle of the Wars of the Roses?
Well, even that's not a straightforward answer. Technically, the last battle, the very last battle of the Wars of the Roses, is the Battle of Stoke.
Right. Okay, so we have a little framework in our minds of the time scale of that. The first battle being the 1455. The last one, which the series will cover, will be Stoke, which is 1487. Fantastic. So we've got a little bit of a sense from all of that about the kind of how much this series has to cover effectively. Obviously, we'll be focusing more on the stories of each individual battle. So what we'll do is we'll accompany episodes or certain episodes with maybe another Zoom call like this, where Mike and I will discuss in a little bit more detail the kind of the political environment surrounding the battles, because obviously we want the documentaries to be short, fast, effective, and create a sense of feeling about the stories we're telling, rather than go into long lectures of detail. Whereas we'll do some Zoom calls to kind of get some more of that detail if you want to find out a little bit more about the battles themselves.
Yep.
We'll keep it short and to the point today. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike. It's great to kind of talk to you, hear a little bit more about who you are, what you think, and the breadth of your expertise, because I tell you what, there is a lot of work that goes into this, and this man right here is the man behind the scenes. He's the one with the years of research. He's the ones with the new translations of source material and new interpretations that that shake the ground when he announces them. So this man right here is the guy to thank for all that. And I'm grateful you're on board, and I look forward to seeing what more amazing things we can come up with.
Okay, thank you very much.